Our next speaker today is David Israel, who is got his BA in philosophy from Harvard. And I already forgot where he got a PhD.
From the University of California at Berkeley.
Oh, that's right, from at Berkeley. And then he taught philosophy for a number of years at Tufts, and then in 1979 he moved to SRI.
No, BBN.
BBN.
No, it's all right, I'll tell the story. I'll tell the story, yeah.
Well, let me tell you the funny part. So he's a philosopher. So I met him a couple of years ago and asked him what he was doing at SRI. And he said he was doing natural language commercialization. So, and I said, well, which we all know it doesn't work. So I guess the distance from natural language, from philosophy to snake oil salesman is basically their equivalent.
Exactly.
Okay, on that moment, David.
Right. So as Johan intimated, I've spent most of my career doing things that don't work. And I've been extremely good at it, by the way. But this isn't about me, it's about Danny. Actually, it will be a bit about me. And that's because of the little, I don't know, what's the right word, tagline I gave to Valeria, who's escaped, I think, about what I was going to say today. That is, I was actually...
Oh, you, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was actually asked for an abstract, which took me a little aback, frankly, because I thought this was just going to be kind of, you know, friends rapping informally. So I gave an abstract, and the abstract went roughly speaking like this. I was going to talk about why Danny has been such an irritant to me in my professional life. So notice the double relativization. So it's got to be a bit about me, or else, right, I'd be kind of implicitly claiming that Danny was an irritant simplicator. And well, mind you, I'm not going to claim that he isn't an irritant simplicator. For that, there are much better sources sitting actually right next to him, as it were. So I'm not going to claim that. So I'm not claiming. I do try to be very precise in my claims. That's got to do with my background. I do try to be very precise in my claims. I'm claiming that Danny, and I'm going to explain why Danny has been an irritant to me in my professional life. So I should note some things, though, about background or lack of it in some cases. So Danny and I have never worked together. That is, we've never been colleagues in the narrow sense of being at the same institution at the same time. Danny was at BBN, as was I, but Danny was there decades before I got there. In fact, speaking to Bert Rayfield, I don't know if somebody else has said this, but Danny has been in this field now for like a half a century, right?
You're telling things.
Think about it, right? Just think about that. So we usually take the starting point of AI a little arbitrarily, frankly, but still, we often take it as the summer of 1956, right? The Dartmouth Summer Conference. So that's 52 years. We can all do the math here. So anyway, so I've only been in the field, as Johan kind of, although he garbled the story, I've only been in the field for 30 years, so. Okay, that is a bit of the background here. We've never worked together in the same institution. We've never worked together on a formal, we've never been colleagues on a project. I should now state that a little differently at the moment in particular, I'll state it a little differently. We haven't yet been colleagues on a project. I will say no more. I will say. Oh, no, that's right. Naturally, his memory, although I'm much younger than Danny, my memory is not as good, actually. Anyway, no, that's right. We have been colleagues on a project.
The first wasn't really a project.
Well, that's right. That's right. We didn't actually get anything done. It was one of those. So, there's that. Even though I'm much younger than Danny, and especially in the field, I'm much younger than Danny, I can't say that Danny's been a mentor to me. That's a little misleading, I think, although again, I will say something that's kind of related to a kind of mentor-type relationship. But again, that's exactly the locus of irritation, right? So you should, okay? So, so how has he been an irritant to me, given that we haven't really worked together in the narrow sense of being colleagues? We have, as he reminds me, actually been colleagues on a project, but that was a kind of weird project. You have to admit that, right? Anyway, so, you know, anyway. No. Okay, so now I have to tell you a little bit about myself, right? Because again, to get this relativization straight, so you wouldn't be thinking that I'm claiming that Danny is an irritant to core. So, as Johan said, I actually have my professional training, such as it is, was in philosophy, and particularly was in philosophy and logic. So I did kind of techie type stuff in philosophy, you know? Nothing about, you know, love and death. I mean, which was probably actually a mistake when it came to meeting women, but still, you know, it was one of those things. I did often, though, wear black, right? Like Rich, that was something I might have learned from Rich Fikes, except I did it even before I knew Rich Fikes. Anyway, so by the time I got into AI, which was in 1979, say, although I am very young, much younger than Danny, I was already kind of, I just want to keep reminding people of this, you know, in case anybody's in any doubt. I was already kind of, you know, formed intellectually, or as it might be malformed or deformed, but I did have, frankly, a relatively stable intellectual approach to things, right? And how shall I put this? It was expressed in, I'll put it that way, it was expressed in a kind of inclination to go for really fairly abstract theorizing. Okay, I was a big fan of abstract theories. And in fact, I got into AI from philosophy through the good offices, good for me, not necessarily for the field, of Bill Woods, who was then the head of the artificial intelligence department at BBN, and joined an ongoing DARPA project called, or at least we always called it, I don't know what its official name was, I guess, called Kernelu, right? That is KRNLU, Knowledge Representation for Natural Language Understanding, okay? And one of my colleagues was a Bobrow. It wasn't Danny, though. It was the distinguished gentleman sitting to his left, right? Rusty Bobrow was a member of this, what I thought, still do think, by the way, was an extraordinarily both bright and accommodating, to me, accommodating group of people. I'll name just a couple of them. So there was Bill Woods, Rusty, Ron Brackman, Candy Seidner, and the late, by my lights, great and much lamented Jim Schmolze. Okay, so it was a wonderful group. I joined that group. So I remember when I met Rusty. I don't exactly remember when I met Danny. I'll get to that in a bit. But anyway, the reason they hired me, in the academic year 78, 79, I was hired as a consultant to the project in formal semantics. That is, they hired me because somebody had told Bill, and I even know who had told Bill, I won't tell anybody. Somebody had told Bill Woods that there was this guy, David Israel, who knew a bunch about, who had worked in, and hence knew something about, I don't know, Montague grammar. Now, I don't know, I mean, I see Larry Cartman out there in the audience. I know he knows whereof I speak, but you know, it's been a long time. There was a period in the early 70s, mid-70s, when there was a kind of fad for Montague grammar. It's a very complicated mathematical model, I'll say, of the semantics of natural languages. Pat is saying, not so complicated. Well, it's true, it's not so complicated. It wasn't so complicated that I couldn't understand it. But anyway, so that's why I was hired, and I kind of consulted there a week, roughly speaking, a day a week, roughly. And then they, for some reason, offered me a job at the end of that year, and I said yes. So all of a sudden, I became an AI person. But as I said, I really did have a pretty well-developed, I'm going to put this presumptuously, intellectual style, okay? Now, then I met, well, I mean, I met a lot of people, some of whom were in this audience, actually, way back when, including Ken Forbus, who was then a child, by the way. He was, I mean, he was like, you know, I mean, God only knows. I mean, it was kind of child, you know, I mean, he was doing an internship, I guess, I don't know what it would have been, at BBN when he was a graduate student at MIT. Yes, right? Yeah. And he was a kid. So I met a whole bunch of people. At some point, I think in 1980, I met Danny. But I'm not exactly sure of the context. It doesn't really matter terribly much. It might have been, I mean, certainly we had met by the time of the first TripleA conference in the summer of 1980 here at Stanford, wherever direction I'm pointing, wherever direction it is. I have no idea. Anyway, where it is. Okay, but, okay, now, so you got the picture. Here's, remember it, because this is, Danny has been an irritant to me, so I've said a little bit about me, in my professional life, in AI, of course, right? So I had this style in which, I mean, I really just, you know, you kind of presented, I mean, the way I thought about problems was at a fairly abstract level, and I was always on the search for kind of systematic theories. Sometimes they would be, you know, sometimes they could be formulated in some fancy formalism, sometimes not, but that was the general, that was my picture. Okay, so over the years, I mean, and by the way, as I say, although I'm much younger than Danny, by the time I met him, by the time I got into AI, this was a really stable feature of my personality, this was a stable feature of an unstable personality. And it would be disingenuous of me to say that I've changed enormously. Frankly, I haven't changed enormously. But Danny has been one of the people who just keeps bugging me without, I don't think he even realizes this, just keeps bugging me in a particular way. And I want to tell just a little anecdote. I want to tell a little anecdote that from a meeting that we were at together just a couple of weeks ago that I think is just to me was a wonderful illustration of this, right? So a couple of weeks ago, the TripleA sponsored its first, I forget what they called a member event? I don't even know. Anyway, that was held here in Palo Alto at the Sheraton or something, and it was about robotics, in particular vehicular robotics, right? So, and it had talks by Red Whitaker of CMU, who had won the recent DARPA Urban Challenge, and Sebastian Thrun of, I don't know what, Stanford/Google, but anyway, who had won the first, I don't know what, I don't know. He's not here to disagree or something. Or, who had won the first kind of DARPA desert, you know, unmanned vehicle challenge. And they gave very good talks, not surprisingly. And Danny asked the very, there was a, okay, talks are over, questions. Danny asked the very first question. That's already irritating, by the way. I'm not going there. So he asked the very first question, and here I'm just going to paraphrase. I'm just going to paraphrase. Right? And he said, look, you're talking about, autonomous vehicles, or more or less fully autonomous vehicles, or to be more precise, vehicles which are in principle capable of full autonomy. But they're going to have people in them, and one of those people is going to be behind the driver's wheel. I mean, is going to be in a position to be the driver, I'll say. And you guys, that is, Danny was now talking to Red and Sebastian, you guys have said nothing, right, about the interaction between the system and the person, which is absolutely, and quite correctly noted, this is absolutely critical to thinking about these things. Are you just, absolutely critical. And Danny was, not only was he, of course, as right on, But it was just that point, right, about thinking about the way in which the systems we try to build, and sometimes build, but anyway, at least try to build, right? Right? The point of contact between those systems and systems systems like ourselves, right? That only, well, billions of years of evolution have built, right? Systems of bizarre complexity, and complexity of a kind that frankly is not easily, if at all, captured in theories. That is, it's precisely that point at which people, I mean, it's, you know, when thinking about AI systems, building AI systems, right? It's precisely that point where you've got to start thinking about how the system is meant to interact with, or should interact with, human beings. It's precisely at that point that I give up being able to think systematically about these things, or at least I personally can't think systematically about these things, as I've discovered over the years. And that Danny keeps reminding me, again, I don't think he well, certainly doesn't have me in mind in general, but he keeps reminding us, right, that one has to think it through. One has to think it through with appropriate expectations. That is, it's not gonna be like the theory of torsion-free abelian groups, the kind of thing I grew up on as a child, as it happens. It's not gonna be like that, right, Valeria? It's not gonna be like that. You're gonna have to think about it in different ways with a whole different kinds of expectations about what the result of that thinking is gonna be, but it's absolutely crucial that you think about this stuff, right? And it's because over the many years that we've now known each other, which is now 28, assuming we met in 1980, which I think is right. Over those many years, right, in the arguably for me, not frequent enough interactions that we've had, that Danny, because it's second nature, or maybe first in his case, first nature to him. He just, these issues about what is very crudely called, if you think about it, the human-machine interface, or human-computer interface. That's slightly less crude, I guess. You know, that those just keep coming up and keep bringing me up short and ticking me off, right? So, although given that, I'm not sure I want to thank him for this. I should at least, because I'm not sure I do, but I at least want to acknowledge it, right? And so this is my opportunity to acknowledge it. And that's it. Questions?
Anybody want to argue with David there?
No one must argue.
Well, it's amazing that you've proven my maxim that philosophers talk to themselves. Leave that alone.
While we pretend to talk.
Yeah, right.